Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Today's story is titled, She Painted His Portrait Without Knowing His Face. Now, let us return to our main character. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of a tiny art studio in Brooklyn. Brushes soaked in cloudy water, unfinished sketches scattered across the wooden floor, and in the corner, a young woman sat hunched over a canvas, her fingers stained with cobalt blue. Her name was Elena Cruz, 27 years old, a portrait artist who had spent the last year watching her dreams dissolve between overdue bills and hospital invoices. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. Elena hesitated before answering. Miss Cruz? The voice on the other end was low, calm, and oddly formal. My employer would like to commission a portrait. A private one. She frowned. Who is your employer? He prefers not to reveal his name. But he has seen your work. He insists on you and only you. Something about the precision of his tone sent a shiver down her spine. I do not usually take anonymous clients, she said softly. The payment will be $20,000. Up front. The brush slipped from her hand. $20,000. That was more than she had made in a year. What is the catch? You will paint him, but you will not see his face. He will sit behind a white silk curtain. You may hear his voice, speak to him, but you cannot look at him. Do you accept? For a moment, she could only hear her own breathing. Outside, the sirens wailed through the city, a reminder of how close her studio was to eviction. Yes, she whispered. I accept. The next afternoon, Elena stood before a grand brownstone building on Fifth Avenue. The marble steps gleamed under the winter light, guarded by iron gates that whispered of wealth and secrecy. A man in a dark suit opened the door. Miss Cruz, please follow me. He led her through a hallway lined with abstract paintings that looked like they cost more than her entire life. They stopped before a tall door of polished oak. He is waiting for you inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paint thinner. A soft white curtain divided the space. Behind it, she could hear the sound of breathing, slow and even. A man's silhouette shifted faintly through the fabric. Good afternoon, Miss Cruz, the voice said deep, composed, with a rasp that hinted at pain. Thank you for coming. She swallowed hard, clutching her sketchbook. May I ask your name? No names, he replied. Let us keep this professional. Then what should I call you? Call me Adrian, he said after a pause. It is not my real name, but it will do. His tone was distant, but his words carried something fragile beneath the surface, a man used to control who was now forced to hide. You may begin whenever you are ready. Elena set up her easel, her hands trembling as she mixed the first shade of gray. The curtain fluttered slightly as he spoke again. You must think this is strange. A little, she admitted. But art is strange too. Sometimes you have to paint what you cannot see. He chuckled softly, a sound that was both warm and lonely. Then perhaps you are the right person for this. As she lifted her brush, the world outside the curtain disappeared. All that remained was his voice, low and calm, guiding her hand. She could not see his eyes, but somehow, she could feel them on her, studying every breath, every silence between her words. Somewhere in that quiet studio, two strangers began a story neither of them could predict. The following evening, Elena returned to the brownstone for her second session. Snow had started to fall, soft and slow, dusting the marble steps in white. She brushed the flakes from her coat and entered, greeted by the same silent butler who led her back to the studio. The silk curtain was already drawn, the faint silhouette of Adrian visible behind it. Good evening, Miss Cruz, his voice came, low but gentler than before. Good evening, she answered, setting her brushes in order. You sound different today, he said. Maybe because I am less nervous, she admitted. Or maybe I am beginning to understand your voice. A pause followed, long enough for her to hear the quiet hum of a heater and the ticking of a distant clock. You paint by sound, then? He asked. By instinct, she replied. Every tone, every silence, it all tells me something about who you are. He let out a soft breath, one that almost sounded like a laugh. And what do you think I am so far? A man who hides behind more than a curtain, she said without looking up. He was silent again, but she sensed the air shift, as if her words had struck something raw. Hours passed like minutes. She painted while he spoke about music, about how he used to play piano when the world felt too heavy. I can no longer play, he said quietly. Why not? My hands, he answered, and the way he said it made her stop. There was pain there, real and deep. She wanted to ask more, but she did not. Instead, she changed the color on her palette, adding softer tones of ivory and gold. When the session ended, she wiped her hands and turned toward the curtain. Tomorrow at the same time? Yes, he said. You may call me if you need anything. I think I only need more paint, she said lightly. And perhaps, a little truth. He said nothing as she left, but she felt his gaze, invisible through the curtain, following her all the way to the door. Outside, the night was sharp with cold. She pulled her coat close and walked toward the subway, the city lights reflecting off puddles like broken glass. She wondered who Adrian really was. No ordinary client lived in such silence or surrounded himself with so much emptiness. 2 more weeks passed. Each evening she came, and each evening, the curtain remained between them. Yet she began to recognize him through details, the way his voice warmed when he spoke of childhood summers by the sea, the slight catch in his breath when he laughed, the distant grief when he mentioned losing something he never named. The portrait slowly came to life. The man on her canvas had kind eyes, even though she had never seen his. His expression was strong yet vulnerable, like someone learning how to be human again. One evening, the butler left a small envelope on her easel. Inside was a letter in a precise, elegant hand. For your mother's hospital bills, it said, with a check folded inside. Elena froze. She had never told him about her mother. Her first instinct was anger. How much did he know? Was she being watched? The next night, she confronted him. How did you know about my mother? She demanded. The curtain stirred faintly. You mentioned the word hospital once, he said calmly. I assumed. You assumed a lot, she replied, her voice trembling. You should not interfere in my life. It was not interference, he said softly. It was gratitude. For what? For seeing me when no one else has in a very long time. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Slowly, she exhaled and whispered, then let me earn it. Let me finish the painting my way. As you wish, he said. The tension melted, replaced by something unspoken. When she lifted her brush again, her hands no longer trembled. She realized that every color she had chosen had begun to change, not just the shades on her palette, but the hues inside her own heart. By the end of the 3rd week, Elena's painting was almost complete. The man she had imagined was no longer just a stranger hidden behind a curtain. He had become something more, a presence that lingered even when she left the brownstone each night. Every brushstroke felt like a confession, every word they exchanged another thread connecting 2 worlds that should never have met. One evening, as she mixed shades of amber, Adrian's voice broke the quiet. You once told me art is born from pain, he said. Do you believe that? She looked at the canvas, her heart tightening. I believe art begins when words fail. Pain just makes the colors deeper. A faint sound came from behind the curtain, the creak of a chair as he shifted. Then you must have lived 1,000 lives to paint like that. She smiled sadly. Sometimes I think I have. Tell me, he asked, what keeps you painting when everything hurts? Hope, she said softly. The hope that someone might look at my work and feel less alone. There was silence, and then his voice dropped lower. Then you and I are not so different. That night, when she left, the butler handed her a note. Tomorrow's session will be cancelled. Mr. Adrian requires rest. The next day stretched endlessly. She wandered through the snow-covered streets of Brooklyn, restless. Without their conversation, the city felt empty. She tried painting other things, but every canvas ended up bearing traces of him, the curve of his jaw, the gentleness she had never seen but somehow knew. When she finally returned to the brownstone 2 days later, the air felt heavier. The room was dimmer than usual, the curtain perfectly still. Adrian, she called. No answer. She waited, then heard a faint sound, a cane tapping against the floor. He was closer to the curtain now. Forgive the delay, he said. My doctor insists I should rest. But I could not stay away from your voice. She hesitated. Are you ill? Not anymore, he replied carefully. Just recovering. The words struck her as odd, but before she could ask more, he changed the subject. Tell me, Elena, if you could paint anything without commission, without fear, what would it be? She thought for a moment. Light, she said. Not sunlight, not lamps. The kind of light people carry inside them when they love something so much that it hurts. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, You have already painted that. The next evening, when she arrived, the curtain had been moved slightly. Not enough to see him, but enough that she could make out the edge of his profile, the line of his shoulder. Did you move this? She asked. Perhaps, he said. Perhaps I am tired of hiding. Then let me see you, she said, her heart pounding. Not yet, he answered. Soon. His tone was gentle, but behind it was a shadow of fear. She respected his boundary but could not stop imagining his face. That night, she painted until her hands ached, the portrait finally taking shape. The man on the canvas looked alive, sad, strong, beautiful. When she stepped back, tears blurred her vision. The next morning, she received a call from the brownstone's number. It was not Adrian. It was his lawyer. Miss Cruz, Mr. Hale, she froze. Who? Mr. Adrian Hale requests your presence tomorrow evening at the Metropolitan Art Gala. He asked that you deliver the completed portrait personally. Her pulse quickened. Hale. She had heard that name before, a tech tycoon, philanthropist, one of the most powerful men in New York. But that could not be him. Could it? The next evening, she dressed in the only black dress she owned, patched at the hem, and arrived at the gala under the glittering chandeliers. Cameras flashed, music swelled, and as she entered, people turned. At the center of the grand hall, under a veil of light, stood her portrait displayed as the evening's highlight. Then a voice announced, Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Adrian Hale. Elena's breath caught. From the far end of the hall, a man stepped forward, his gaze searching the crowd. It was him. The voice behind the curtain, the man she had painted without ever seeing. And now, for the first time, their eyes met. The room fell into silence as Adrian Hale walked toward the stage. Every step echoed beneath the chandeliers, steady and deliberate. The crowd parted, whispers rising like a wave. Elena stood frozen near the entrance, clutching her purse, her heart pounding. The man on the stage was nothing like she had imagined, yet everything she had painted. His hair was dark, brushed neatly back, a faint scar traced the side of his jaw. But what caught her most were his eyes, deep, steady, and filled with something achingly familiar. He stopped in front of her portrait, studying it with a mix of wonder and pain. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth but trembling at the edges, this piece is called Unseen Light. It was painted by a remarkable artist who reminded me that beauty can exist even when we cannot see it. The applause thundered, but Elena could not move. Her breath caught as he turned toward her. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to narrow to that single moment. After the speech, she slipped away, trying to escape the crowd. But before she reached the door, a hand touched her shoulder. "You are leaving without saying goodbye." His voice was close, softer now. She turned. "Why did you lie to me?" she asked quietly. He exhaled, guilt flickering across his face. "Because when we met, I was a man hiding from the world. I had lost my sight after the accident, and I was told I might never regain it. I wanted to be seen for who I was, not for my name or my fortune. So you hired me under false pretenses," she said, her voice tight. "You watched me bare my soul through every stroke of that painting while you hid behind a curtain." He took a step closer. "I did not watch. I listened. And for the first time in years, I felt alive." Her eyes glistened, torn between anger and heartbreak. "You should have told me." "Would you have stayed if I had?" he asked softly. She wanted to say no, but she could not. "You are not the man I thought you were," she whispered. "Neither am I," he said, his tone raw. "But I want to be. Because of you." The crowd began to drift out, the music fading into a gentle piano tune. Elena turned away, her voice trembling. "You had no right to interfere in my life, Adrian Hale. I am not one of your projects." "You are right," he said quietly. "But you are the only part of my life that feels real." She walked out before he could say more, the echo of her heels sharp against the marble floor. Outside, the night air stung her cheeks. Snow fell in soft spirals, catching in her hair as she walked into the streetlights. The city roared around her, but all she could hear was his voice behind that curtain, the sound that had once brought her calm now breaking her heart. Over the next days, she avoided every call, every letter. She could not look at the portrait again. Yet his words haunted her. "You and I are not so different." 1 week later, a package arrived at her studio. Inside was a single key and a note written in the same precise handwriting as before. "The gallery on 5th Street. Midnight. If you wish to destroy the painting, it is yours." The message felt like both an apology and a challenge. Against her better judgment, she went. The gallery was dimly lit, empty except for the portrait standing in the center beneath a spotlight. And beside it, Adrian waited. He turned when he heard her footsteps, the light catching the faint scar on his jaw. "You came," he said quietly. "Only to finish what you started," she replied. "Then finish it," he said. "If you still hate me, destroy it." He handed her a palette knife. Her fingers tightened around it, her chest rising with uneven breaths. But when she looked at the portrait, the warmth in those painted eyes, the quiet dignity, she could not do it. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. "I do not hate you," she whispered. "I just do not know how to forgive you." He stepped closer. "Then let me earn it. Let me show you who I am, without the curtain, without the lies." For the first time, she did not step back. They stood there, surrounded by light and silence, two people who had both hidden behind walls of their own making. The night stretched around them, fragile and full of possibility. For days after their meeting in the gallery, Elena could not shake the image of Adrian standing there beneath the light, his eyes filled with regret and something deeper she did not want to name. She told herself to forget, to focus on her work, but every brushstroke betrayed her. His voice, his words, his silence, they lived in the space between each color. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived, sealed with the emblem of the Hale Foundation. It was not from Adrian but from the board of directors. They were hosting a charity auction, and her painting, Unseen Light, had been nominated as the headline piece. The proceeds, the letter said, would go toward funding a new art therapy wing for blind patients. Elena read the letter twice, her hands trembling. It was exactly the kind of project she had once dreamed of, and yet she hesitated. Accepting meant seeing him again. That evening, as she watched the snow fall outside her studio window, she finally whispered to herself, "Maybe this is not about him anymore. Maybe it is about finishing what I started." The night of the auction, the hall shimmered with crystal lights. Elena arrived quietly, hoping to remain unseen, but the moment she entered, people turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That is her, the artist who painted Hail. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but before she could retreat, Adrian appeared. He looked different, no longer the guarded man behind a curtain but open, unarmored. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low but steady. "I did not come for you," she replied. "I came for the foundation." He smiled faintly. "That is what I hoped you would say." The auction began, and the bids climbed higher with every call. When the final hammer fell, Unseen Light sold for a staggering amount. The room erupted in applause. Adrian approached the podium. "This painting," he said, "was created by someone who taught me that true vision has nothing to do with eyes. It is about courage, the courage to see people for who they are." His gaze found her in the crowd. "And to forgive them when they fall short." Her chest tightened. The applause felt distant, like an echo in water. When the event ended, she slipped out into the cold night. But as she reached the steps, she heard his voice behind her. "Elena." She turned. "What do you want from me, Adrian?" "Nothing," he said simply. "I just wanted to tell you that I can see again." The surgery worked. She blinked, stunned. "That is good news," she said softly. "It is," he agreed, stepping closer, "but it also means I see everything I did wrong. I used my pain as a shield. You broke through it." "You do not owe me anything," she said. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I want to give something back anyway." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a key. "To what?" she asked. "A space," he said. "Your own studio. Fully funded. I bought it under your name. Call it a start." She stared at him, speechless. "Why would you do that?" "Because your art saved me when nothing else could." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and real. She looked down at the key, then back at him. "You think buying me a studio will fix what you broke?" "No," he said quietly. "But maybe it will build something new." The wind picked up, carrying a flurry of snow between them. "You are impossible," she whispered. "So are you," he said with a small smile. "That is why this story is not over yet." She hesitated, then tucked the key into her pocket. "If I take this," she said, "it is not forgiveness." "I know," he replied. "It is hope." She turned and walked away into the night, her footsteps fading against the snow. But for the first time in a long while, her heart felt lighter. Behind her, Adrian watched until she disappeared around the corner, the faintest smile touching his lips. He had no idea if she would ever come back, but somehow, that no longer frightened him. Weeks turned into months, and winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring. The small studio Adrian had given Elena sat in a quiet corner of Soho, filled with sunlight and the scent of turpentine. At first, she avoided it, afraid that stepping inside would mean accepting his gesture. But one rainy afternoon, she unlocked the door. The space was perfect: large windows, raw brick walls, and a single easel standing in the center like it had been waiting just for her. She placed her brushes on the table, tracing the edge of the wood, and whispered, "All right, Adrian. I will start over." Days passed, then weeks. She painted again, not for clients or galleries, but for herself. For the first time in years, her art felt pure, unburdened. Yet every color still carried the memory of his voice, his eyes, his promise. She had not seen him since the auction. Sometimes, when she passed the skyline from the bridge, she imagined him in one of those high-rise offices, living his life in silence, just as she tried to live hers. But fate had its own plans. One afternoon, she was arranging a new exhibition with a local curator when a familiar voice drifted through the open door. "I almost thought you would never use this place," Adrian said. She turned sharply. He stood in the doorway, dressed simply this time, no suit, no mask of wealth, just a man. "How did you know I would be here?" she asked. I did not, he said. I was walking by and saw your name on the sign. He looked around, smiling faintly. It suits you. You should not be here, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Probably not, he agreed. But I wanted to see what hope looks like. Her chest tightened. Adrian, do not do this. We had an ending. Maybe, he said. But endings can be rewritten. He stepped closer, studying the canvas she had been working on, a sunrise painted in soft gold and blue. That is beautiful, he murmured. It feels like forgiveness. It is not, she said quietly. It is peace. He nodded. Then I am glad you found it. She hesitated, then asked, why are you really here? He met her eyes, and for once there was no distance in his gaze. Because I realized something. The curtain was never between us, Elena. It was inside me. I built it out of guilt and pride. You tore it down without even knowing. She swallowed, unable to speak. He took a slow breath. I came to say thank you. And, goodbye, if that is what you want. She turned to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the studio in gold. Do you ever get tired of running from happiness? She asked softly. He smiled. All the time. For a moment, they just stood there, the world quiet around them. Then, almost without thinking, she said, do you still have the key? The one to this place? He asked. Yes. Then keep it, she said. Because maybe peace is not something we find alone. The words hung between them, fragile and trembling. He took a slow step closer. Does that mean you forgive me? She met his gaze, her eyes glistening. Not yet, she said. But maybe one day. A faint smile curved his lips. Then one day is enough. He reached for her hand, not to pull her closer, but to hold it gently, as if afraid to break the moment. The light shifted, catching the dust in the air like glittering snow. In that quiet studio, two souls who had once met behind a curtain finally stood face to face. No lies, no contracts, no distance. Just truth. Just peace. Just the beginning of something real. In the weeks that followed, Adrian and Elena began to see each other quietly. No grand gestures, no promises, just coffee in the mornings and long walks through the city at dusk. It was strange at first, how natural it felt. Sometimes they talked for hours about art, about loss, about the strange ways people find redemption. Other times, they said nothing at all, letting the silence fill the space like music. One evening, they found themselves back in the studio. The scent of paint lingered in the air, the golden light of sunset pouring through the tall windows. Adrian stood near a new canvas where Elena had just begun to sketch. Is that your next piece? He asked. It might be, she said, smiling faintly. It is called Second Chances. He nodded, his eyes soft. Fitting. Do you believe in them? She asked. I did not, he said, until you. She looked away, pretending to adjust her brush, but her heart betrayed her, racing faster. The quiet between them felt warm this time, not heavy like before. Adrian, she said, her voice low, why me? You could have chosen anyone to paint that portrait. He paused, searching for the right words. Because you see what others overlook. You do not paint what is there. You paint what people are afraid to show. Her breath caught. That is not talent, she whispered. That is pain. Maybe, he said gently. But pain is only wasted if it does not teach us to love better. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Do not panic, he said with a soft smile. It is not what you think. He opened it to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a paintbrush. A reminder, he said, that even the smallest strokes can change the picture. She took it carefully, her eyes glimmering. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "You are beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air, unplanned but true. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, she did not see the man who had lied to her or the millionaire who could buy anything. She saw the man who had learned to see again. She placed the pendant around her neck, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked. "For not giving up when I did." He smiled, a quiet, grateful smile. "You were worth waiting for." The sun dipped below the skyline, and the room glowed with a soft amber hue. As the city lights flickered on outside, Elena picked up her brush, dipped it into paint, and began to work again. Adrian stood beside her, silent, content to simply watch her create. The canvas in front of them was blank no longer. It had color, life, and something more. It had hope. And for the first time, neither of them was afraid of what the next stroke might bring. The following months brought a quiet rhythm neither of them had known before. Adrian balanced his work at the foundation while Elena's new studio became a small sanctuary for both of them. People began to notice her again, this time not as the struggling artist who painted in borrowed light, but as a woman whose art carried truth. Her next exhibition, Second Chances, opened on a crisp autumn evening, the walls lined with portraits that captured the small moments of human forgiveness. Adrian arrived late, avoiding the press and photographers. When he finally stepped inside, the crowd parted instinctively. He looked around until his eyes found her across the room. She stood near her newest piece, a large canvas that glowed under the soft gallery light. It was a painting of two figures standing side by side in front of an open curtain, the space between them filled with gold. He walked toward her slowly. "Is this us?" he asked quietly. "It is what we used to be," she said. "And what we chose to become. You always manage to make me feel like I am still behind that curtain," he said with a smile. "Only if you choose to be," she replied. He glanced at the painting again, then back at her. "It is beautiful," he said. "But it is missing something." "What?" she asked. "The ending," he said. "Because it has not been painted yet." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the noise of the gallery fading into a hum. "Do you ever regret how it all began?" she asked. "Every mistake," he said. "But none of the moments with you." Her chest tightened, her voice almost a whisper. "Adrian, people will talk. They always do." He smiled softly. "Let them. I spent half my life worrying about appearances. I would rather live the other half being honest." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was an invitation embossed in gold. "The Hale Foundation presents the art of Elena Cruz." She looked up in shock. "What is this?" "A permanent exhibition," he said. "Your work deserves more than a single night. It deserves to live where others can see what real vision looks like." She blinked, tears threatening to spill. "You cannot keep doing this," she said. "You cannot keep rescuing me." "I am not rescuing you," he said softly. "I am standing beside you." The air between them felt charged, tender, real. Then, as the guests began to applaud a new sale announcement, Adrian leaned closer. "I do not care what the world thinks anymore, Elena. I only care about what you see when you look at me now." She looked up at him, her heart steady. "I see a man who finally learned to see himself," she said. "And I see a woman who finally stopped hiding from love," he replied. They both laughed quietly, the sound soft and unguarded. When the night ended and the lights dimmed, they walked out together into the city. The world outside was cool and alive, the streets glowing with reflections of gold and silver. For once, there were no curtains, no secrets, only two people walking side by side, their steps in rhythm, their silence full of meaning. Winter returned again, quietly and without warning. The first snow fell over the city like powdered glass, coating the rooftops and softening the noise of New York. Inside the gallery, now carrying her name, Elena stood before her most famous piece, Unseen Light. It had been a year since the night of the auction, a year since she and Adrian chose to walk forward together, not as savior and muse, but as equals. She traced the edge of the frame, remembering every moment that had led here: the curtain, the voice, the heartbreak, and finally, the truth. The door behind her opened, and footsteps echoed across the marble floor. She did not need to turn to know it was him. "You still come here early," Adrian said with a smile. "Old habits," she replied. He joined her, standing at her side. "It feels different every time I look at it," he said. "Maybe because we are different," she answered. "Maybe because it reminds me that love is not perfect," he said, "but real love never hides." She looked up at him. "You really believe that now?" "I do," he said softly. "Because you taught me to." They stood in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the city drifting through the windows. "There is something I need to show you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught, but he only smiled. "Do not worry, it is not what you think this time." He opened it, revealing a delicate silver ring engraved with the image of a tiny paintbrush and a single word inside: truth. "It is a symbol," he said. "Not a promise, not a contract. Just the truth between us." She looked at him, her heart swelling. "After everything, you still think I would say yes?" "I do not know," he said, "but I had to ask anyway." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes, Adrian." But not because of the ring. Because of the man who finally stepped out from behind the curtain. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Outside, snow began to fall harder, tapping gently against the glass. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Do you realize," she said softly, "that this is the longest portrait I have ever painted?" "Then do not stop," he said. "Keep painting. Keep living. Let us make the rest of it together." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe the best stories are not the ones we plan," she said. "Maybe they are the ones we learn to see." He kissed her forehead, and they stood there as the snow fell beyond the glass, the city glowing with light. The camera of memory would have caught them like that: two people who found love not through perfection, but through forgiveness and faith. And somewhere, on the wall behind them, the painted eyes of unseen light seemed to shine brighter, as if even the art itself finally understood its purpose. Because sometimes, you do not need to see someone to know that they were always meant to be yours.